Into the wild I'm going, into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home. Into the wild I'm going, into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Welcome to the Freebirth Society podcast. This is a radical space for women who are ready to celebrate their autonomous choices in birth, motherhood, and beyond. Together, we'll learn about wild birth through personal narrative, we'll explore the politics of birth, and we'll analyze everything that relates to our lives as women from a feminist perspective. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Sister, is birth work your calling? Do you long to witness and support the awesome power of women as we make life, form kinship, and transform the world through undisturbed mother-centered birth? In your most expansive vision of your life, are you the authentic midwife of your community, walking in total grace, reciprocity, and trust with women through the sacred portal of pregnancy and birth? Then our groundbreaking Radical Birthkeeper School is for you. It is an immersive, live, intensive mastermind in all things authentic midwifery that will give you the blueprint and guidance to launch a life-altering, world-shaking radical birth brand and business. Think birth business mastermind, life-changing coaching intensive, deep dive into all things birth, step-by-step roadmap for serving women authentically, and the wise woman initiation that you have been dreaming of, all rolled into one epic program that will change your entire life. It is time to become the lighthouse that guides women home to ourselves. Head to freebirthsocietycourses.com/radicalbirthkeeper now to claim your spot and say yes to your calling. Today I'm bringing you a mind-blowing wild pregnancy story with quite the plot twist. At a supposed 44 weeks gestation with no signs of labor, Rachel began to backtrack on her conception timeline and realized that she actually conceived this baby shortly after an early pregnancy loss at around 9 weeks. Since she hadn't tracked the bleeding as a miscarriage, she went on with her pregnancy believing that she was 3 months further along than she actually was. Her year-long pregnancy went on to prepare her for an intense, nearly 60-hour birth at 42 weeks. Rachel's story is an incredible testament to the mystery of birth, the power of trust and patience, and the magic of sitting in the unknown. So I'm excited to hear your story in its entirety. Obviously, peripherally, I know a bit about it, and
Right.
it's in some ways, it's just another normal story of a woman being pregnant and having a baby. And then on the other hand, we've got this pretty interesting spin to it. So I don't want to give too much away. I just want you to take it from here. And I imagine we're probably going to call this episode something like the year-long pregnancy, right?
Yeah, that
what
would
we
make
said
sense.
a long time ago. So
Yeah.
just take us to the beginning of wherever you want to start this story.
Okay. So I'll start at like our conception journey back in, gosh, what year is it? Okay, so January 2021, so last January, my husband and I, we went and visited his family in Michigan, and we spent a week like surrounded by all his nieces and nephews and his younger brother. And we were just like, felt very fulfilled, like spending all this time with children. And we had talked already about wanting children. And we came home and like sat on our couch in our quiet house. And we're just like, what do we do now? Like, what's going on? And we just kind of like felt this emptiness, and we're like, man, like why don't we just like start this journey? Like, let's call in our baby. And I had already been tracking my period for a couple years. So I had like a pretty good idea of when I was ovulating. And so we decided to try like the next night. We were just like, all right, let's do this. You know, we didn't do any like sort of special ceremony or anything, but we were just like very conscious about like welcoming in a child. And after a few weeks went by, I like woke up with the worst night sweats I had ever had in my life. And that same day I like started crying about something that I don't normally get emotional about. And I'm like, I'm gonna take a pregnancy test. So I did, and it was positive, and we were ecstatic, and we were just like super, super excited. I got the positive, and then I took a test the next day too, just to like be sure, and it was positive again. And I was like, all right, this is for real. Yeah, and I had like a really easeful beginning. Like I didn't really have any nausea or anything like that. My energy level was pretty high. And then around 9 weeks, I had like a lot of cramping and some bleeding, but it wasn't like super intense. And, I've done a lot of research and listened to a lot of women's stories. And I'm like, there are so many things that can cause bleeding in the first trimester. So I was just like, I'm not going to seek assistance unless I feel like I really, really need it for some reason. But even if it was a miscarriage, I knew that I was going to work through it at home anyway.
Totally.
So I didn't do anything about it. When it happened, I did pass like a blood clot about an inch long too. And that was the part that really shook me. I was actually on break from work. I like came home to have lunch. That happened. And I like saved the clot in a little bowl. And I was like afraid to examine it because I was like, what if I find a fetus in there? And I called Rob, and he came home from work, and we looked at it together, and like it just looked like blood clot. Like it didn't look like there was any sort of, fetal tissue in it. And so I kind of calmed down. I was like, okay, well, if my belly keeps growing, well, now I still have life inside me. If not, we can conclude that was probably a miscarriage. And that was really tricky to just kind of like sit in that unknown for a few weeks. And
well, it's kind of the message of your whole
everything,
your whole story. Yeah, it doesn't end there. For anyone listening, I would just kind of add to this that cramping and blood loss is more likely than not going to lead to miscarriage. The blood loss by itself, not at all, not necessarily, but usually that early, the combination of the two.
Yeah.
And my guess with the clot and that you didn't see more tissue, my guess, obviously I don't actually know, but my guess would be it just was a lot earlier than 9 weeks, right? So just because you released at 9 weeks, as I'm sure it's you could have stopped growing the pregnancy, at 3 weeks, at 4 weeks, at 5 weeks. And so at that early, you're not going to see much, most likely, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But
and like
who
looking
knows
at it
this
in
stuff?
hindsight, right. Looking at it now, I'm like, that's kind of what makes sense.
You
And
kind of just pin this as like question mark,
yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
we'll
At first
see.
I definitely had like a full on freak out. Like I mourned it for a little bit. Like I was kind of like, oh my gosh, like did I just lose this baby? But then I kind of like snapped out of it, like, don't think the worst, like maybe it's okay, like let's just kind of see where things go. And so that's where it was like more difficult. A couple weeks went by, and then at 13 weeks, so like exactly a month later, I had some more light bleeding for a couple days. I didn't have any cramping this time, but it was like very light, like one panty liner a day light, like just
For how many days?
for like 4 or 5 days. Just, and so I'm like, but my belly seemed to keep growing, which is the weirdest part. And so at 17 weeks, we actually got married. And I had a very hard time finding a dress that like fit my little bump that I already had. Like I had already popped, and and again, in hindsight, I was only like 3 weeks pregnant. So like that part blows my mind.
Well, let's
But
clarify for listeners kind of where
oh
we're
yeah.
going with this story.
Yeah, so basically the original like guess date for this baby was at the end of October. Like October 28th was my guess date, you know. And I didn't have my baby until February 9th. So I had like an extra over 3 months of pregnancy that I was not expecting.
Oh my God.
And I didn't realize this until I was already a month past my guest date.
God. I remember in the membership, you were like, 44 weeks,
Yeah.
trucking along here. And me messaging you being like, I think we should try to figure this out.
Yeah. And, still didn't really figure it out until he was born.
Totally, right? Okay, so
But
what is like, spoiler alert here, what is your assessment of what actually occurred?
yeah, so what actually occurred was I had the miscarriage at 9 weeks. At 13 weeks, I had like another small cycle, I guess, like another bleed. And then we conceived again after that 13-week bleed. So
Okay.
we were like,
So that
okay.
wasn't implantation bleeding of a new pregnancy.
Or it could have been. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. But would those
True.
numbers add up? If that was true, you'd be 2 weeks pregnant at that point. So does the math add up? Because that would be end of February, and then you birthed in February. No, that doesn't make sense.
No.
It's very mysterious. So if you birthed in February, you most likely got pregnant in what month?
May, actually. So when I like kind of went back and like tried to recalculate it, I remember May 4th was my guess for the date of conception for this baby.
And so did you have a full period ever again between the miscarriage and the like pregnancy that stuck?
No, other than that light bleed.
Little light bleed.
Yeah.
And that was what month? The light bleed?
That was April.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. You
April?
got pregnant. I'm with you. You got pregnant in January. 9 weeks later is end of Feb, beginning of March. And then you have the light bleed in April. And then we're thinking you get pregnant with this baby beginning of May.
Right. Yes.
And then you birth him in February. But the head fuck of this whole thing is you never really knew if that was a miscarriage or not. And so you went along your pregnancy. What you didn't know was a new pregnancy counting from your first pregnancy. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that will be clear. Well, and I really like this story in the sense of kind of underlying the what's the right word? Like without the ultrasounds, without the doctors, without the measurements, without all this stuff, especially being for all of us being kind of new to this. It's not like you're sitting in some council with 100 elder midwives who all can walk you through this and brainstorm this with you, right? Like we're just kind of out here like on our own trying to figure this shit out together. And so, this stuff does happen. And I think it teaches us a lot. And I love, whenever I checked in with you throughout this pregnancy and throughout this year-long, experience, your attitude about it was so, I'm sure you had your moments that I didn't see, but your attitude was mostly pretty chill and pretty unfussed, even to the head fuck of October, which we'll get to at the end. But so I hope that's clear to listeners. You never marked it in your head as a for sure loss. It was kind of just a question mark, and therefore you kept with the original dates, and therefore thought you were way further along than what turned out to be true.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So take us to, you said 17 weeks, and some people will see this on YouTube and see that you did air quotes, but people will listen to this and not know. So if you're listening, she's air quoting 17 weeks because it was actually
only like 3 weeks or so. Yeah.
But you had a baby bump.
Yeah. I know. I know. Yeah.
Is it like just psychosomatic at that point?
I don't know. Or maybe just like my body already geared up, started to change, started to put on the extra fat stores already. And like,
crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Wild. Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, I had a really easeful pregnancy. When I thought I was like 19 or 20 weeks is the only time that I had any sort of nausea, which makes sense because that would have been like 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And I only got the nausea when I was driving in a car for a long distance. So and I never actually ended up throwing up. I was just kind of like a few weeks where I was like not feeling great on my commute to work.
So when you went to the festival, when you went to Matriarch Rising,
Yeah,
how pregnant did you think you were?
22 weeks.
And how pregnant were you really?
That minus 13. So like 9 weeks. Is that right?
But you looked pregnant.
I know.
Okay, wait. Sorry. One more thing and then I'll shut up. And I just have to get my head wrapped around this whole thing.
Yeah.
So when you birthed him in February, what
Mhm.
gestation what gestation now do you think you birthed him at?
42 plus 1.
Okay. Because I was going to say maybe it was implantation bleeding. And then what would you have been at from the April? But then you would have been like 46 or something insane, right?
Yeah.
So it can't be that.
Yeah, because when I calculated my guess date, I mean, I did this like after he was born even.
I bet.
But when I finally realized like, okay, this is finally when I give birth, when I calculated that from the the guess of when he was conceived on May 4th, which also happened to be the 2-year anniversary of me and my husband meeting, which is kind of a fun little tidbit.
That's cute.
It is. But it was January 26th would have been the new like guess date.
And when was he born?
February 9th.
Yeah, that's really I'm just kind of tripping on I met you at the festival and I mean, I wouldn't have said you looked 22 weeks necessarily. I mean, obviously women look all different sizes at all different gestations. But if you had only been 9 weeks, I mean, you had like a pregnant belly.
Yeah. I know.
That is so crazy. This is such a crazy story.
It blows my mind.
Totally.
I mean, I went through it and it's still hard to believe sometimes. By the time I hit what I thought was 30 weeks was when I started to be a little bit concerned because I wasn't feeling like a ton of movement yet. But I knew, there's a possibility of the anterior placenta, being a first time mom, like the sensations that you feel can be delayed in that sense. But by the time I hit, 33 weeks, air quotes, I was feeling it more regularly. So I felt good about everything again. But of course I was only 19 or 20 weeks at this point. So it made more sense in hindsight. And then at what I thought was 35 weeks, I had maternity photos done. And, like you said, everybody carries differently. I was not very large, but I talked to plenty of other women. I've seen plenty of other pregnancies and what it looks like on people. And I was like, maybe I just carry small. I have a short torso. So like, there's not a whole lot of place for the baby to go.
Which so then it means that you're unlikely to carry small.
Exactly.
So when you were really at the end, were you huge and were you like,
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. That was huge.
Oh my God.
So by like Halloween, that would have been like a couple days past my guest date. I was like, all right, let's blow up the birth pool, just like have it ready. That way we don't have to like fuss with it whenever I go into labor because it could be any day now. So we blew up the birth pool on Halloween and it stayed blown up until February. We ended up flipping it upside down at one point just to not collect dust in it. By Thanksgiving, because we had canceled plans for Halloween because we were like, we don't know when this baby's coming. Thanksgiving, we didn't travel for Thanksgiving because again, I was like, well, I'm already past my guest date here. But Thanksgiving marked like air quotes 44 weeks. And I still had like no signs of labor. I was just kind of like, man, like I don't even know if this baby's dropped yet. Like what's going on? And that's when I finally came to the conclusion that, maybe I had miscarried. I was like, okay,
and
so
when did you come to my house? What month was it when I palpated you and we had that whole talk?
That was the beginning of December.
Okay.
So it was just a couple weeks after I made the realization.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Because by
And
that point, we were all sitting around like, you don't seem like a woman about to go into labor.
right.
Remember that?
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
we're all like sitting there scratching our heads. Okay.
Yeah. And you were like, you probably have like a month left to go. And this was like the beginning of December, and I was pregnant for 2 more months. So
Tell me about your head, like in your spirit from November on, like that's a pretty big deal at what did you say, the end of November, that you're starting to be like, wait a minute,
yeah.
I must have the dates wrong. Like, tell me about that, because that's a pretty big deal.
It was. Well, I always have had this, trust that a baby will be born when they're ready. So I was in no way trying to like get this baby out, even when I was reaching, what I thought was when he should have been born. I wasn't trying to do any sort of even natural induction things.
Oh my God, can you imagine if you did?
Exactly, right?
Ooh.
So, or, if I was working with a midwife and, it's like, oh, you're past 42 weeks, like can't take care of you anymore. Like, I mean, there like so many different things could have happened if I had approached this differently. But yeah, it was definitely a mind fuck. Like it was so hard to wrap my head around. And come December, I did get emotional a few times, just like I just want to meet my baby. I met other women who were pregnant, like found out they were pregnant after me and were having their babies, and I'm just sitting here pregnant. No. I remember meeting a woman at the festival who told me she was like 9 weeks pregnant and she had her baby before me, and I was like, what's going on? So yeah, it taught me a lot about trust and patience, and I just kept going through it.
And was your partner ever like, babe, go to the hospital and like figure this out or anything?
Not even once. No, he was 100% on board with everything from the beginning. I'm very grateful he was not in that mindset to try to get me to go seek assistance in any way.
And did you play with that idea? I mean, that would have been totally understandable if in October, November, December, you were like, I need some tools here to help me figure this out.
I thought about it, but towards the end of pregnancy, I know that ultrasound can be, I mean, measuring on an ultrasound is not super accurate.
No.
And like it can be variable of up to like 8 weeks difference. And I'm like, well,
it's not going to help you.
No, I'm like, I know I'm going to give birth sometime within now in the next 8 weeks. So like, what is that going to help me? Like, I know I have got like 1 or 2 months left. So I was just like, that's not going to help me.
Yeah. So by November, by Thanksgiving, you're like, okay, that must have been a miscarriage. And then you recalculate and realize, based on the facts that you have, that the new birthing window is probably end of Jan, beginning of Feb, which is 3 more months, right?
2 more months. Well, I knew it was going to be either 1 or 2 more months from when I realized.
And so you're just like, like, how do you settle? I mean, that is nuts, Rachel. That you like, I'm just picturing myself like you blow up the tub. You're like, any day now, 40 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks, 43 weeks. Oh, never mind. 2 more months. Like, and you're just okay. Like, I feel like I would have such a freaking meltdown. That's just so crazy.
Yeah. And I actually left work when I hit what I thought was 42 weeks, because I was like, maybe I just need to be home and like just in my space and focus and like not keep myself so distracted. And it kind of ended up turning out for the best, because my job, even though I talked to them previously in the summertime about maternity leave, they told me I would get it. And then when I left, I was like, okay, so how am I getting my pay for this? Blah, 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 blah. They're like, oh, you don't qualify because you're part-time. I was like, oh,
Oh,
cool. I talked to you in July about this to confirm.
scary.
Yeah. So there was a little hiccup there, but because I had a couple extra months, I was able to find a remote job
Oh,
and
nice.
keep working a little bit. And it ended up working out. But yeah, that was just crazy. And I still feel a little bit saddened about the fact that I didn't properly mourn the loss of my first pregnancy either. Like, I had a day where I was kind of like, oh, maybe that's what happened. And I was, in shambles and all this, but I would have treated it differently if I had solid knowledge that that was a miscarriage. But I remember like my grandma calling me, be like, is everything okay? And I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, we're just waiting. She's like, well, have you talked to someone? Have you seen a doctor? And be like, yeah, everything's fine. Like, I saw a chiropractor once a week during my pregnancy. So when I said I saw a doctor, like, I was not lying. But
Did you like send out kind of like a mass text of like, hey, heads up, I miscalculated my dates. It's going to be a couple more months?
yeah, I told my whole family the whole spiel, and I actually made a post, like a public post on Instagram as well,
Mhm.
because that was like the easiest way to really reach out to everybody who was
Mhm.
like sitting there anxiously waiting. And I was just kind of like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be pregnant for another month or another 2 months. I'll let you know when this baby's here. Like, I don't know what's going on. But yeah, I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting. But it was kind of nice those last 2 months. People stopped asking me if the baby was here.
Totally.
That, like, it's
See,
like
that's
that's the
one way to
secret
do
I
it.
unlocked. Like, they're like, oh, she doesn't know at all, so we're just gonna stop texting her every day.
I'm just picturing like if women just started when people are like, when are you due? If everyone was just like, oh, I have no idea. That would
Well,
kind of be amazing.
that that's kind of what happened at the
Right.
end. Like, people would see me in public. I'd go into a store or something, like, oh, when are you due? And I'm like, I don't know. And
Not a clue.
they're like, what? I'm like, I don't know.
I love that so much.
Totally throws them off.
I love that. Oh, it's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so take me into final days and into your birth story.
So yeah, final days, like the last week or so, I developed like the pup's rash on my belly. It was so itchy. I could get barely any relief. And I looked into it and it was like, oh, it's more common with boys for some reason, and can also be a sign of them passing meconium. I don't know. I literally just used Google. Who knows? But I was like, oh, that's cool. But nothing I could really do about it. And then on the night of February 6th, it was a Sunday, Rob and we stayed up late watching TV, went to bed around midnight, and then I woke up at 1:30 with contractions. So I had an hour and a half of sleep, and my labor was 60 hours long, and I could not sleep
No,
throughout any of it.
no, Rachel, no. Oh man.
Yeah. So
Amazing.
woke up at 1:30. Um, I was up all night, like moving through each contraction. It was like I started timing them just to get an idea of what was going on. They were like 10 to 15 minutes apart. And I was still very much in disbelief that I was in labor, because I was
Totally.
like I never had any sort of like, practice in Hicks or practice contractions or
Warm
whatever
up.
like that. Yeah, I never had any of those warm up contractions. Nothing. I had no signs. I just woke up and was in it. And then by 8:30 in the morning, I had a bloody show, and I broke down crying. I just like felt so relieved. I was like, oh my gosh, this baby's finally coming. Like, I'm finally gonna meet my baby. And it was just like, that was the confirmation I needed. And then by like 9:15, 10 a.m., I had already thrown up a couple times. And I was just stopped recording every time I threw up because I was just, my body was just like, purging just everything. And so around 10:30 in the morning, Rob began to fill up the birth pool, and because it was upside down, collecting dust since Halloween, it was just so
There's cobwebs
wild.
in it.
Yeah, it was so surreal. I'm like, there's water going in there right now. Like, oh my gosh. So I labored in the pool for a little bit. I got out, kept laboring in our room. And as the day progressed, my sensations got closer and closer together. They were between like 3 and 5 minutes apart when I stopped timing them. And I was just like, cool, they're getting closer. I'm not going to stress myself about this anymore. And then around 4:30, I had Rod get some more hot water in the pool, started laboring in there again a little bit. And then I got out and I was just like so uncomfortable that I couldn't sit anywhere. I couldn't lay down. I could only be like in hands and knees or on my knees with my hands on the mattress, with my head on the mattress. So it was like, those were like the only two positions I could be in. And I had had calluses on my knees for like 2 weeks after this. It was crazy. And at 6:15 that day, so it was after a full day of labor, my water broke. And
this is all the first day?
Yeah, this is all the first day. So
but it was a 60-hour labor?
Yeah.
Damn, so a lot happens in that first day.
Yeah, because my waters were open for like a day and a half.
Okay.
So at 6:15 my water broke and it was filled with meconium. So I was like, cool. But I had educated myself enough to know like that's a variation of normal, and I wasn't gonna, go seek assistance just because there was meconium in the waters. I knew to look out for signs of respiration, like breathing it in after the baby was born, fever, all that stuff. So I was, excited. My water broke. I was like, oh, probably gonna meet my baby by the morning. Like, but I labored all through the night and all through the next day. And then I had another night of labor. And yeah, it was a marathon. I fell asleep standing up a few times, like in between contractions, and like kind of fell forward and hit my knees on the bed frame.
Oh my God. And it's just you and Rob, right?
Yeah, it's just us. And Rob took a couple much needed naps here and there, but he was mostly up with me the whole time.
Yeah.
I think that part of it was harder for him than for me, like staying up that long. Because I was doing something.
Exactly. There's no option for you. Like
Exactly.
You literally cannot. Whereas with him, he could fall asleep.
Right.
Yeah. And so, tell me about that second day and into that second night, like towards the end. As you know, I had a 52 hours, so I'm feeling for you. And what was it like? How heady did it get for you? How much did you play with options or self-sabotage? Like, did you make up stories like I did? Like, what was it? Or did you just get like super high and go deep in? Like, what was it like to have such a long labor?
A little bit of both, honestly.
Yeah, right?
That last night of labor, I started to get like really like pushy contractions. I was just like really grunting through them and like getting really low, and I was like, okay, it was like super primal sounding. And I was like, I felt almost like he was kind of stuck, like, so I was kind of like trying to move somehow to get him out. But I actually have a friend who's a doula who lives nearby, and I did text her at like 4:00 in the morning, and I was like, I know it's so early in the morning, but like, is there any way you could come over? And I didn't hear back from her until like, I don't know, 10:00 in the morning or something like that. And I was like, no, we're fine now. Like, I was still in labor, but I was like, no, I feel fine. I just had to like reach out to somebody.
Totally, of course.
But yeah, by the time I could like feel him like in the birth canal, I was able to like look in with a mirror and see like very pale flesh, you know, and it was very wrinkly, and I was like, I think that's a head, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it could be anything.
I'm like, I don't know. And like, that was honestly the hardest part of my labor, was like seeing that and not really knowing what was coming out, because I was like, it could be a head, which I was hoping for, obviously. And I was prepared to deliver a breech baby. I was like, it's fine if it's not a head, if it's just another part of the body. But like, if it's a cord and I have a cord prolapse, like I know that's a real emergency. Did not want to have to deal with that. So that definitely, like, I got in my head a little bit about that. And Rob told me later on that he was like, he didn't say it in the moment, but he was like, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I thought like maybe it was like dead flesh. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, and then the reality of like a stillborn baby comes into play. Like that could have been the reality. And so of course, like I had to face that too.
And I think that's an important point here, that I think it's very, very common for first-time moms, especially if they're birthing without an experienced birth keeper to kind of reassure them. It doesn't look or feel how you think it will. And also what it physically, like how hard it is coming down, then when you like internally how it feels, but then when you touch it or see it, it like doesn't add up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of disorienting. And I think that's important to kind of highlight for new women, you know, new moms listening to this, who are pregnant and planning to birth without anybody, because it's not unique to be like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
You know, like, is that a head? Is that a butt? Is that an arm? Is that even alive? Like, what even is that? And that's normal. You know, I think most of us wonder that.
Yeah, like all of that went through my head.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
What's going on? And it wasn't super clear that it was a head until he started crowning. Like,
oh yeah, then there's no doubt. Oh
yeah,
God,
exactly.
I can still feel it.
You're so fresh out of it. I remember I posted somewhere, I think in the membership, about like having these like pushy contractions for so long, and I'm just like, is this normal? Like I feel like I'm just pushing and pushing and pushing and nothing's happening. And when he was born, he did have like bruising up on his temples and forehead, so he was definitely lodged in there pretty good. But when it finally got to the morning of the 9th, got through the night again, and around 10:30 or 11 is when I had Rob fill up our bathtub, which is just a tub shower, so it's small. Not the most comfortable to be like laboring in. I tried it once and I was like, get me out of here, and went back to the birth pool. But I needed like that relief of the hot water. But I had him do that again, because at this point the pool was cold and had like coconut oil floating on the top surface from my skin.
Yeah, you need to change
and
the scenery.
I was like, that's just, I don't want to be in there anymore.
It's done.
Yeah. So
I mean, a 60-hour birth, you're gonna use every corner of your house. You're gonna go and try everything. Okay, so you get into your tiny tub.
Got into the tiny tub, and when I started crowning finally, Rob was just like, okay, yeah, that's a head. Like, he was like, you're doing it, keep going. Like, and he was like, just encouraging me. And there's like a little bar in the shower, so I was like holding onto the bar and basically like doing this wide like sumo squat in the tub, and I pushed out his head that way, and it was just like such a relief to get his head out. And I was like, I felt down and I felt his head, and I was just like, okay, like I was kind of in shock. I was like, this baby's actually coming out of me. And then I kind of just maneuvered and got like, not totally on my back, but like a little bit reclined to give him
with his head out?
Space. With his head out.
Woof. Wow.
To give him some space to come out. And I was just like, he's coming right now. Like I could tell. And I was like, he's coming right now. And he just flew out into the water. And Rob grabbed him up and brought him to me, and his cord was really short, so I could only like lift him up to my belly. But he started crying right away, and just a tiny little like soft cry. Even to this day, his cry is like very soft. It's never sounded annoying to me, which that might be just, he's my baby. But
well, they don't all have soft cries.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a nice soft cry. And he was face up. So the back labor and like the hard labor made more sense to me once I realized he was, sunny side up, as they say. Yeah. And we just sat in the tub for like an hour, and I tried to get him to latch, and I couldn't get him to latch. That was like a whole nother journey. It was a rough start for our breastfeeding journey. But I had harvested some colostrum and was able to syringe feed him for the first
Oh my
day.
God. Oh, it was like really bad.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. He had, I had a lactation consultant come over when he was 2 days old, and he had lip, buccal, and tongue ties. And we got those all released when he was 2 weeks old. But for those first couple weeks, I mean, I was pumping and bottle feeding and formula feeding because my supply wasn't keeping up. And it was, it was a whole thing.
And then after the revision, were you able to figure it out with him?
Yeah. By the time we hit like 2.5 months, he was fully breastfed.
Amazing.
But it took some time, and it was like,
oof.
I was not expecting that, like, at all. I thought that part would be way more easeful.
I mean, it would have been without those freaking ties.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing that you did. Right. You know what I mean? Oh, that's so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. He couldn't.
Poor baby.
It was tough. But he is doing great now, and he was doing great then, after we figured all that out. Just definitely an unexpected hurdle that we had to get through, which I'm great at going through those at this point. So, but yeah, we just kind of hung out in the tub for a little bit after he was born. I also passed a very large clot along with the placenta when I birthed that about an hour later. It was like the size of a baseball. It was like 4 inches wide and like round. And I decided
just that one.
Yeah, just that one clot. I really didn't bleed a whole lot, which was nice. Like very minimal bleeding. And then I decided to just put the placenta in the freezer. It's still there. I was thinking we were gonna like plant it in the spring, but it just didn't feel right. And I feel like probably on his first birthday we'll end up doing something with it that feels fun. more special. I don't know why yet. We might just bury it. But yeah.
So I mean, right after birth, then it's like breastfeeding drama for the next 2 months, it sounds like, which is, oh God, I feel for you. That's so intense.
Yeah.
And so how does, I guess, kind of in like wrapping this up, how would you say the year-long pregnancy and that end of the year, reset, and how does that all influence, because then you go into this 60-hour labor, which is absolutely normal for a first-time mom. It's absolutely healthy and fine and normal and all of that. But we both know there's not a lot of stories out there of that, because most women aren't birthing without medical providers, and a long labor is going to be pathologized and interrupted way before it reaches 60 freaking hours. So I mean, I would imagine that there's so many lessons wrapped up that then serve you not just in your 60-hour birth, but then in this nursing struggle. And just kind of like, who are you after all of this, and anything you want to speak to about that?
I feel like this whole situation has just taught me so much about trust and about patience. And I had a moment where I was like, I consider myself a pretty intuitive person, but when I realized that I didn't actually realize I had a miscarriage, I'm like, well, was my intuition like leading me astray? Like, was I not, as intuitive during this pregnancy as I thought I was because I didn't catch that? And I kind of beat myself up about that a little bit. Like, how did I not know? You know? But at the same time, I was still in high spirits. And I feel like that really encouraged the next baby to come through. We were still very open to there being life growing inside me. And so there was, after some time. But yeah, overall, I'm a very easygoing person, very adaptable. If I'm waiting for something, I'm a very patient person.
Clearly.
I mean, I guess
I'm
that was
surprised you
still
didn't name your
true.
son Patience.
I did look up names that
meant that. Yeah,
meant that. I didn't find anything I liked. His name is Wilder, and we decided on that name long before the wild pregnancy journey got wilder and wilder, but it just seemed very fitting at the end of everything. But yeah, I feel like whenever I do have another baby, it's going to feel like a breeze. Yeah. Although I'll probably be slapped with something else unexpected.
Oh, guaranteed. Guaranteed.
But hopefully I'll at least know how pregnant I am. That'll be nice to not be mentally pregnant for 54 weeks. Because yeah.
Amazing. I love this story.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of you for sticking with the breastfeeding. It's understandable that lots of women don't in those circumstances. Yeah. And, I hope that is a takeaway from this story that women hear, especially who are listening on the brink of birth, is there is hope on the other side of the revisions. And, you don't know what baby will be born with these ties. They're so prevalent. And
yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot of misdiagnosed stuff and stuff you can do without it. But when it's severe, like you kind of got to do it if you want to nurse. And
yeah,
I know plenty of free birthing mothers who their babies have, really extreme ties. And if they stick with it, and they get the revisions and they stick with it, and they do the right rehab afterwards, and they have beautiful, beautiful long nursing relationships. And you're one of those women to live to tell the tale. And it's so important because so many women are just like, this is never going to work,
Yeah. And it definitely felt like that for a while. And I was like, is it something with my anatomy too? Like, not having like super protruding nipples or something? Like, is it harder for him to latch because of my body? And looking into that, I'm like, I know that that's not a factor. And and I have my chiropractor, she would talk to me about getting her baby's ties revised, and she was like, oh yeah, after about 3 weeks it was like smooth sailing. And I hit like the 6-week mark after it, and I was still struggling. And I'm like, it's gotta come to an end sometime. Like, and it did. Yeah, it was like 2.5 months of struggling with that.
So that's what, like 10 weeks?
Yeah. And so it was like 8 weeks after his ties were revised that we finally got it down. So
yeah, that's good for women to hear.
Yeah.
Well, you're a warrior mother.
Thank you.
Seriously, just for sticking with it and like staying, steady on the course and reaping the benefits, it's amazing.
Yeah. I was very determined to establish a breastfeeding relationship. I was very determined to have this birth how I intended to have it, no matter how long I had to wait for it. So
amazing. I love it. I'm so proud of you.
Definitely proud of myself too.
Good.
To stick with it. It was well worth it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. And you helped me out too, talking help me talk through stuff. And thanks for having this podcast too, because I'll tell you, I listened to so many while I was pregnant, and just hearing other women's stories, that was like one of my biggest motivational factors, is knowing that there are so many variables as to how this can go. And I'm just like, just because my story doesn't look like somebody else's doesn't mean it's not
bad.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Totally. Well, that's why we have to tell these stories, is exactly what you just said. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
And that's it for today, my sisters. Check out everything we do, including one-on-one and group coaching. Learn about our private membership, in-person retreats, and more on freebirthsociety.com. Our online courses are on freebirthsocietycourses.com, including our flagship course, The Complete Guide to Free Birth. Don't miss the Radical Birthkeeper School if you're ready to become the authentic midwife that women are searching for. Together we rise, and the revolution starts inside each of us. I'll leave you with our Freebirth Society theme song, Wild Woman by Aruba Red.
I honor you for the wisdom you held, the ancient traditions of plant medicine and womb magic. I feel the spirit of the ancestors as I place my hands upon my belly. This sacred portal will be honored. Eons upon light beams of survival, withstanding the eradication of our power by design. I will not allow the separation of our young to be forced upon me. My sisters will no longer birth in captivity. The picket line redefined from burning our wild women to paralyzing us and drugging our babes. Strapped down in a clinical white bed, drying up the milk from our breasts. Keep your needles. My family will never again be doomed to chase those dragons or your poison. We reject your fear. We choose love. Everything with intention. Death, ascension. I will fly and bring her back from the stars. Conscious